Committee meeting Tuesday, 4th of July. Item 1. Oh, do I have to read this privacy thing? It's on here. That. Apologies, troops, I can't see. Right, if anyone's got one of these electronic devices, please switch it off. Because if it goes during the meeting, I think the latest is a tenner to charity.
Oh, see.
I could do it for you. Remote participants, keep your cameras and microphones off unless you wish to speak or unless you're called to speak. And ideally, don't use the camera. The meeting may be recorded and data collected during the recording of the meeting will be retained in accordance with the Council's data retention policy. The recording of the meeting may be added to the Council's website. Members accessing the meeting remotely should use their SPC or KCC laptop to participate virtually. If you join using the link on the website or on a mobile and tablet device, it is not always possible to identify you and you may not be recorded as in remote attendance. Right, the following staff are in attendance in the chamber. The Head of Housing and Community Services, Charlotte Hudson. Democratic Services, Joe Millard. Nikki Teasdale, Director of Health and Care Integration and Improvement at the Medway and Swale Health and Care Partnership. The emergency evacuation procedure. Is there anyone? We've not been notified of any training. So if the bell goes, it is a fire. Does anyone need help getting out? No? Okay. The nearest emergency exit is there. There is one, the other right through the other side past the lifts. This one's a better one, closest. In the event of an alarm, we will all leave in an orderly fashion and remain outside in the car park until you are notified by the chair that it is safe to return to the building. Okay, that's it. That's 4 minutes of notes. Right. Apologies for absence. Joe?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies have been received from Councillor Pete Mill, who's substituted by Councillor Roger Clark. Apologies from Councillor Hannah Perkins, substituted by Councillor Mike Henderson. Ben J. Martin, substituted by Councillor Chris Williams. Councillor Karen Watson, substituted by Councillor Ashley Wise. And Councillor Lloyd Chapman, substituted by Councillor Richard Palmer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Declarations of interest. Anyone got any? Pecuniary or non-pecuniary? No? Okay.
Probably just need to declare that I am a director on 12 Rainbow Homes and we do have a paper on that later, although I'm not a member of the committee. I did have to declare it last week.
Okay, thank you. Minutes of the meeting held on 7th of March, numbers 765 to 772. Those people who were here, not many of us, is it your wish that I sign these as a correct record? You can say agreed. Oh, well, yeah, I'm happy with them then. Okay, that's good. Forward decisions plan, July 2023. Charlotte, will you take that?
Thank you, Chair. So at the moment we have 3 items listed on the forward decision plan. I just want to give an update on a few of those. The first item that we are looking to start developing with this committee is the housing assistance policy, and that relates to sort of the service facilities grant, which obviously we just touched on in the previous briefing. I believe at that meeting it may be more of the scope of the policy and looking at how we work with members to take that policy forward rather than the fully finished item, because obviously as part of the committee's responsibilities it is to help us develop and shape these policies going forward. So that will be the starting of that piece of work. In terms of the next item on the Nightly Let Procurement Award, I updated at the previous meeting, which I know the membership of the committee significantly changed since then. With our temporary accommodation services, at the moment, we don't have a framework in place, and we purchase on a daily basis with different providers depending on what's available. We were looking to regularise that procurement and have gone out to tender with Maidstone and Tunbridge Wells Borough Council to do effective tender. Unfortunately, as part of that market engagement and testing, that we didn't get enough of the providers to come forward to make a viable framework procurement. So we are not able to progress with that procurement award and therefore bring a report forward to this committee. We are going to keep that under review, but we are using our current arrangements on spot purchasing that accommodation and looking at what other options that we can bring forward. So that item is now going to be removed from the board plan, but I just wanted to make sure that the committee was updated with why that's happened and the status of that procurement exercise. The final item on the board plan that Councillor Harrison and I have been discussing is, as you are aware, the temporary accommodation budget is significantly high for us as a council, and last year we were significantly overspent. And obviously, budget monitoring does sit with Policy and Resources Committee, and that is the responsibility of that committee to analyse the budget. But as it is a significant issue for council finances, but also in relation to this committee, Councillor Harrison has asked that we do a bit of a deep dive exercise into the temporary accommodation spend. So the proposal is to bring to the next meeting to make some terms of reference about how we look at that and what that looks like to go forward. So that's the only items currently on the board decision.
Thank you, Charlotte. For the benefit of maybe not Councillor Henderson, but that last item that Charlotte mentioned, in the old days when we had a committee system, each committee on a regular basis, quarterly, actually had their own budget before them, and they monitored it and they asked questions and all the rest of it. The main part of the budget for this committee is, as we've just heard in the briefing, the temporary accommodation. So that's why we're going to be having that back here so that we can keep an eye on it. What you do, if you need the accommodation, people are entitled to it, you've got to pay. But at least we should be monitoring it and seeing what's what. And if need be, going cap in hand to Policy and Resources Committee to a few more pence off of them. So that is why that is there. Presumably the other committees will also be looking at their own budgets on a quarterly basis, but I'm not on them. Okay, thanks. So we then move on to item 6, Medway and Swale Health and Care Partnership, Population Health Management Programme update. We have got Nikki Teasdale here, as I've already mentioned. I'm presuming that you have read this report. So Nikki's going to give an overview and then we will get on to questions. But before we start, I will be moving that her report be noted as per the report. So can I have a seconder for that, or do I not need a seconder? Okay, seconder for that. Well done, Rich. You'll complain afterwards when you realise what you've done. And thank you for the report, Nikki. Even though I sort of read up on this stuff, but I was very impressed with what's happening in our patch. So over to you.
Chair, and thank you for having me tonight. First of all, I just thought obviously we've got a lot of new members in the room tonight, so I'll just explain briefly what Health and Care Partnership is about, and the fact that Swale Borough is an equal partner around that table for the Health and Care Partnership. I don't belong to any particular organisation. I work for the Health and Care Partnership. I'm hosted by Medway Community Health, but I work for the population. So I work as much for Swale Borough as I do for Medway Council and MCH, HCRG, all the organisations that provide health and social care within the Medway and Swale footprint. The Health and Care Partnership is responsible for not all of the Swale footprint. It's responsible for the Sittingbourne and Sheppey corridor. The other parts of Swale sit under the East Kent Health and Care Partnership. Whilst we work closely with our partners in East Kent and try to ensure that there's not disparity of service across the footprint, unfortunately there are going to be, we move at different paces and we've got different priorities. Our Health and Care Partnership a couple of years ago made a very firm decision that we would use population health management to drive our agenda. That meant that we would be focusing on health inequalities and levelling up rather than doing services and service design that's a one size fits all, because we know by many years of past experience that doesn't work. That firmly put our Health and Care Partnerships attention on Medway Central in the Medway footprint and Sheppey and Sittingbourne within the Swale footprint, because when you look at health inequalities from a data and evidence perspective, the health inequalities that are experienced, particularly by people living in those areas, are significantly worse than most other areas within our country. So with that, we have a lot of the focus of the Health and Care Partnership is around putting in interventions to level up services across the Swale footprint. And a lot of the work that's outlined in the paper goes to, I suppose, evidence some of the achievements that we've managed over the last 2 years. The biggest being that we are building a community diagnostic centre in Sheppey. Our patients and population in Sheppey don't access diagnostics, and it's not always that they're not readily available within MFT, so the acute trust, but actually when you look at the wider determinants of health, our population struggle to access due to the wider determinants of health. So things, the environmental factors, their working environment, travel arrangements, and a whole range of things stop our populations accessing health. We put in a very strong business case to the national team that we wanted 2 diagnostic centres within the Medway and Swale locality. And I think we're one of the only areas in the country that was granted our proposal based on the health inequalities within our community. So the CDC, Community Diagnostic Centre in Sheppey, is the main hub, the spoke being in Rochester. And that's going to make a huge difference to our population. We're not just going to be offering diagnostics that people can sort of access on a routine basis. So if they've got a regular, condition, we're going to be doing a lot of screening at the diagnostic centre. One of the biggest health inequalities within the Swale footprint is lung cancer, and most of our population is diagnosed in stage 4. If you're diagnosed in stage 4 of lung cancer, your outlook is quite poor. If you're diagnosed in stage 1, it's curable. We're going to be offering, and we're going to be one of the first areas within the UK, it's been piloted in a couple of other areas, to be offering targeted lung health checks. So we'll be inviting our population in to screen them for lung cancer. So anyone that's got a smoking history that's above the age of 50 will be invited in for a CT scan, which means that we can hopefully reverse some of those trends. So the diagnostic centre won't just be about offering normal diagnostics, it will be promoting screening. It will be used in conjunction with the Minster Frailty Ward that's already up and running on the island, so that we'll be able to move patients back to nearer their homes and localities, and therefore family, because that family support in recovery is really vital. But we'll be able to move them back earlier, because actually any diagnosis at the moment we can't move people to the Minster Ward if they're still waiting diagnostic tests. But if we've got the CDC there, then obviously they can have diagnosis whilst they're on the unit. The other area that I wanted to talk about, which is in the paper, and I'm not going to go through the paper in detail, is the Health Catalyst programme that we're running. We made Health Catalyst programme. We made a commitment 2 years ago that the voluntary sector was going to be an equal partner around our table as a health and care partnership, have an equal voting voice on all our boards. Because I think when we came to, I'm a clinician, I've only ever worked in the NHS. The population and pockets of the population don't trust the NHS. And that's, I think there's been a lot of promises over the years, and every time we have a new government, we have a rejig in the NHS, and therefore having that stability, it doesn't work. We have one idea come along, we're reorganised, we have a restructure, and then something else comes along. So we wanted our health and care partnership to sit outside that political cycle, and we set up a framework with the voluntary sector to have them as an equal partner. The Health Catalyst programme is using the voluntary sector to reach communities that we don't normally reach. And so we're looking and we're engaging with communities such as those that are drug and alcohol dependent, our female street workers, some of our migrant communities are very underprivileged communities, but communities that the voluntary sector are already working within those footprints. And we've used the Health Catalyst programme to do a baseline of what the public and those particularly vulnerable groups perceive as being their health inequalities. And the output of that programme is that we've got a pot of money that we will be then giving to the voluntary organisations so they can try and bridge some of those gaps, very dependent on what the communities themselves tell us. So it's a different way of working. It's about, rather than taking an idea or a plan as to what we're going to do from a health perspective to communities, it's taking the concept of the idea from the communities themselves, and therefore hopefully making things more meaningful to the communities and to the population that we're engaging with. There's a lot more in the paper, and I'm happy to answer any questions. But I think I'll just stop it there for now, Chair, if that's okay.
Absolutely. I think for the future, I need a few cushions to sit on, because otherwise you're going to say, you can't see my hand. Well, I can't see you actually, let alone your hand. This side I can see lovely. I can see Peter, Roger, and Chris, and the top of your head, Mike.
It's very noticeable.
I won't be able to see your hand. Better? We'll bring a cushion in this time. Okay, I thought that screening one was very good. I have and nobody, because I was watching, just stuck their hand up. I spoke to Hayley, the warden, matron up at the Frailty unit, and she said already some of the patients in that Frailty unit are actually having to get in an ambulance and go off to MFT for their diagnostics. So it's not a case of we can't let them come to the Frailty unit because they're waiting for it. They're actually in the Frailty unit and they've been sent back to Medway to have them. So that will be an absolute boost when it comes. Right, questions. What I should have said right at the start is on the Health and Care Partnership Medway Swale, our rep, that's the right word, is Emma Wiggins. Okay, so just letting you know. So I saw a hand over here, Tom, and I saw Mike. And Tom, Mike, Kieran, Richard, and Anne.
And Chris.
And Chris.
Thank you for that. It's very interesting, especially about the community diagnostic centre that's going to be open on the Shepherd. I've just got a couple of questions about it. The first one is whereabouts will it be located, or has the location not been Do you
want to take a few questions and then?
Yeah, and the second one was part of the concerns I have around healthcare provision on the Isle of Sheppey in particular is the lack of transport around it. So will there be any provisions to help people to get to the hospital? Because it's in quite a nice, it's not in an isolated area, but there are a lot of isolated areas on the islands that people will struggle to get there, particularly the people that we're talking about, the more vulnerable people, disabled people who perhaps can't drive themselves, elderly people that perhaps can't drive anymore or would struggle to use public transport. That's what the main concerns about something. I mean, it's better that it's on the island. It's better than people to travel off the island, which is the case at the moment because the surgery shut. So this is obviously a lot better than that because it's going to give people far closer diagnostics than if they were having to travel to say Medway. But there are still some really isolated people that live on the islands.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the question. So in relation to the location, it's at Sheppey Hospital. We're currently, you've got KCHFT, which is one of the community providers which provide the minor injury unit. They're moving into a void space within the hospital, so we're not taking away any services. We're using the void space within the hospital itself, and the MRIs and lower level diagnostics such as ultrasound and ECG scans and things will be inside the hospital. The CT scanner we're having outside external in the car park, and we're keeping that as a relocation. So it's one that we can move around, a CT scanner that we can move, and precisely for that reason, so that we can actually, if need be, take the CT scanner to the community rather than the other way round, particularly for targeted lung health checks. In relation to your question about those that are particularly living on the far side of the island and the transport, absolutely that's a concern. We have raised the transport issues with our colleagues at KCC. What we're doing from a health perspective, because unfortunately I don't have control of what transport facilities are going to play, but what we can do is take diagnostics to the community. So we're working in partnership with the Sheppey Community Bus, and we're having conversations at the moment about what diagnostics we can put on the top deck of the bus and take out to communities and use the bus on a more regular basis. So those conversations are in process at the moment. We're already linking in with Swale CBS around how we can bolster their transport service that they've already got in place that's got a nominal fee for getting patients to appointments either at Medway or at other trusts depending on the need. So whilst I can't control the transport, from a health perspective, we're doing all we can to sort of try and combat some of that.
Mike.
Thank you. I regret, I think I know the answer to my question before I make it, but to the best of your knowledge, is there any intention of Swale at some point moving back to being within a single NHS administrative area?
Try.
I would love to say yes, but it's unfortunately it's within a single Kent and Medway system. So the Kent and Medway ICB leadership is a single leadership. The reason that we come down to health and care partnership level is when you look at something on that larger footprint. So when you look at health from a Kent and Medway perspective, it dilutes the local need. So we're spending a lot of our time at the moment, or I'm spending a lot of my time arguing for the health inequalities that are within Medway and Swale, because when you look at that picture from a Kent and Medway system, actually the priority isn't here. The priority from a Kent and Medway perspective are places like Thanet and some of the more coastal deprived communities when you're looking at it in the bigger picture, because that's what the data says. So actually having a health and care partnership at a lower level is not a bad thing, because it means that we can focus on the local health inequalities.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Nikki, for a very comprehensive report. Makes for good reading. I think you may be able to answer this. I represent Anne's Ward in Faversham. So you said earlier it comes under the East Kent Health and Care Partnership. The targeted lung health checks, are you aware of, are they planning to do a similar scheme?
We're rolling out from the highest level of need, and Sheppey is one of the worst areas for lung cancer within the UK actually. So it will be standardised, I think, by 2026 nationally, and so it's definitely coming.
Thank you.
Some of the points were covered. I take it when you say screening, they'll be called to that automatically. They won't have to wait for their GP, because I think the GPs tend to be the weak link in the system. And I think, to be honest, I think most of the other people have asked the questions. So if it's called to, I think the system could work. I think it could work, but I do feel that GPs are the weak link in the system that you don't have a control over, basically. Thank you.
So just a point on screening, screening is delivered by the national teams, not GPs. So whilst it might look like GPs are the weak link in the system when it comes to screening, they have got no control over the calling system. It's a national led programme. With the targeted lung health checks, that's going to work because we're in a pilot phase of that. Certainly in the short term, that's going to work in a very different way. And my team are working with GPs to identify the patients that will be then called in. And so there's a different mechanism, but usually screening is delivered by the national team, not local.
Only because it's you.
Thank you, Chair. And the other one, I did have it, and I had to turn over my page. It's just an observation on page 2. It says about Sheppey having the highest inactive people in employment. It gives the age range 16 to 64, which I think is an incorrect age range, because at 16 they're still in full-time education. It should really be 18 to 67 or 66 retirement age, or 67 in a couple of years' time. Because that's more reflective of the working age of the population, and that would give a more accurate figure, whether it's higher or lower. Thank you.
I agree, the data is taken from the national census, and that's how they measure the data.
Thank you, Chair. First, I just want to highlight the first bullet point on page 8. Sadly, I'm horrified but not surprised that if you live in Sheppey, you're likely to die 8.3 years before someone in Woodstock. Sadly, when I lived in Waltham Forest, we were in a very deprived borough there, and 30 odd years down the line, the inequalities are still there, and I think that's awful. I mean, I think it's a brilliant report. It's a start, but I suspect we're still in the position of having the highest patient to GP ratio in the country. We desperately need a lower ratio. We need more GPs. My concern, and what I read about and hear about all the time, is people trying hundreds of times to phone through to get through for an appointment. This is great, but for other things, we need GPs. And to support what Tom was saying, transport in Sittingbourne has also been decimated. Where I live, there's lots of over 90s. They couldn't get to the island, maybe with this CVS, but it's getting harder and harder, and they can't even see the doctor. But brilliant report, it's a start. I want more. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. Unfortunately, GPs come under NHS England. Not if it was down to us, it had been sorted, wouldn't it? actually. There is work going ahead across across Kent and Medway, some targeted recruitment for Medway, Swale and Thanet to try and how can we get people here. Medway is a better position than us because they can say, well, you know, we can get your child in the best school that's nearest to the property that we're going to let you have really cheap because they've got their own council housing. I think ditto Thanet. So that's the sort of things that are trying to be looked at. In the old days, it was called it's not essential workers, was it? You allocated certain properties for like essential workers, and they got them a much more reasonable price. So work is going on recruitment in Kent and Medway, but in terms of actually the whole GP issue, it's NHS England. So doesn't mean we're ignoring it. Just we need somebody here with the spotlight. I'm working on that. Anything else other than that, Nikki, on that one?
Only to say that we're working in partnership with the ICB to try and encourage more GPs to the area. What I would say as a clinician is that it's also public perception that GP isn't always the right person to see, but often the public think that because they're the GP, they are the best person to see. But actually, if it's a medicine issue, then the pharmacist is better placed. If it's a wound issue, the tissue viability nurse is best placed. So whilst we don't have control over the GP numbers, we can try and influence with the other allied health professionals and try and do something different in that footprint. But it's going to be public perception as well, and trying to encourage people to seek the right person to treat them rather than actually it always being the GP.
Thank you. I hear what you say, but what people have told me, they don't even bother trying to contact the GP because they think it's pointless to get through. And I'm not talking about people who've got a wound, people with chest infections, for instance, they're not well enough to be on the phone all morning. So yes, some people maybe go to the GP when they don't necessarily, or try to go to the GP when they don't need to. Other people desperately need to and don't because they can't get through, or the perception is they won't get an appointment, and they may not be wrong. Thank you.
And there is supposed to be a consultation on GPs at the moment, which I'm trying to find the details of, because I agree with what you're saying. Some GP practices you can't get through for love and money. Others, personally, when I do get through, I just say, I think I've got a chest infection. So long as they can use a stethoscope, I don't care who I see. Bob's your uncle, as they say, you're in. But other people think and insist that they see a GP. As well as that, 12 months in a year, there is on average 40,000 missed GP appointments across Kent and Medway every month. 39 to 40,000 missed appointments. Over 12 months, how many is that missed? That means nearly 500,000 missed appointments. And it's no wonder. So not only are you clogging the phone lines getting an appointment, but then you're just not turning up. And some of them might be rushed off to hospital because it was that serious. But I know from my experience over the years of talking to different surgeries, some people insist, you know, they're ringing up at 10 o'clock, or 8:30, isn't it? They're ringing up at 8:30, insisting on having an appointment. 10 o'clock, their appointment comes and goes, no show. So, you know, we do need to do something about this ourselves, you know, maybe peer pressure. But 40,000 missed appointments a month is one hell of a lot. Is that why you can't see your GP or your practice nurse or whatever? You know, there needs to be a a campaign, that is not acceptable. Because if one of my relatives was waiting, couldn't get through, and it's because you keep just not turning up, I'll be quite knocked about it. So, we need to make it unacceptable. That's the sort of thing that we can do. But anyway, once I find out about this GP consultation and all the rest of it that NHS England are doing, what we've done in the past is I've quite happily got a paper, and Nikki gave us some information once, and I got Democratic Services to ping it out to the committee. Don't have to wait for a meeting to get information. We can do it all the way through. So as and when stuff comes through, you will get it. Right, sorry, Chris.
Yeah, and I think Vicky's report is brilliant. It's really positive. It's like a really bright future for things moving in the right direction. I'm afraid I agree with the GPs being a sticking point. I'm interested in the diagnostic side of things. I take it referrals for diagnostic things would still come from consultants and GPs. Or have I got the wrong end of the stick? I'm thinking things like just me myself. I was very ill last year, and I've been waiting over a year for a bone density scan, which my consultant said that I needed. And then moving on to integrated services, Medway and Slough integrated services to me is where the different services, whether it's a wound clinic or a diabetic clinic, they are community services, and they don't always seem to be very integrated. I've got one particular lady that's emailed me, lives in Slough, her GP's in Medway. She's been diagnosed with cancer, and after major surgery, was told that she would have to do her own wound dressings at home and change them because of the Medway Slough overlap. Medway people were coming to Slough to change her dressings at home because they're employed by Medway, and then vice versa because she lives in Slough. Fortunately, I was able to sort things out for her, and she is getting wound care in Raynham. But being diagnosed with cancer is a scary enough thing without having the additional worries of, am I really going to have to do my wound dressings at home myself? So I just wanted to know all this exciting positive stuff. Is it going to make things more integrated across community services, and is the diagnostic thing going to help shorten waiting lists?
Okay, so if I can answer your second point first, and obviously I can't comment on individual cases, but there is, so you've got the provider, the community provider within the Slough footprint is HCRG, formerly Virgin Healthcare, and obviously within Medway, it's Medway the Community Health. We have got an agreement in place across both organisations that they will cross cover if there are community need, as in housebound patients that need home treatment. So if someone's fallen through the net there, then I need to know about it. And as we're moving on, I need to know about it because the agreement is there, and it's probably an operational issue where people are aware and they've just taken it upon themselves to act rather than follow a process. Because the agreement is there that both HCRG and Medway Community will cross cover, the same way that they would cross cover with Dartford or with East Kent colleagues if they fell on other boundaries. So that shouldn't happen. If it does happen, you have to meet the housebound criteria, otherwise you would be expected to attend a clinic because there's a housebound criteria for a reason. But if they're housebound and they've got a diagnosis and they need that dressing, then they should get that dressing. On the second point, or your first point, sorry, about scans, the pathways for how people access diagnostics will be varied. It won't just be from consultants to the diagnostic centre, although that's one avenue. A lot of the referrals will come directly from GPs, and it'll be At the moment, the referral process is that they refer you to the hospital, to a consultant, who then sends you in for the scan, who then sends the result back to the GP. So the GP can cut more, 9 times out of 10, you don't need the consultant in that scenario. You're only going through the consultant to access a diagnostic. So there will be direct access for GPs. There'll also be direct access for specialist nursing teams, for the ambulance service, and for other physiotherapists, so they can access and bring down the waiting list. Our projection for, we've obviously incurred significant waiting lists because of the pandemic. We didn't, under government instruction, we weren't performing anything that was classed as routine and non-urgent for many months. So our waiting list for all diagnostics has increased significantly. We expect within 8 months of having both CDCs open to be back down to normal and constitutional targets within waiting times for all our scans, DEXA being one of them.
Thank you.
I don't know if when we finish that, Chris, you want to have a word with Nikki on that, because that boundary is not the first one that has come up. You just said GPs can refer directly. Well, at the moment, GPs refer and it goes to the old triage, maybe to keep the list down. Everything, I can't speak for Sittingbourne, but here, if you're referred for an MRI, a CT, you name it, it goes to a little triage place and they decide whether or not you need it. And there was a contract in place for said triages across Kent, actually, loads of different ones of them. And there were timeframes for them, which seemed to be shoved in the drawer with the rest of the spec. So it's not, oh, you need to go to a consultant in order for them to refer you to a scan. Our residents aren't actually getting to see a consultant. They're getting as far as the triage.
If they're referred through to triage at the MFT, Foundation Trust, then all triages are carried out by a consultant. And so whether it be a cardiology or respiratory, those triages are actually carried out a paper exercise by a consultant. So whilst the individuals might not be seen, their documentation is reviewed by a consultant who may then refer it back to the GP and say it's not necessary. The diagnostic centre will stop that process anyway. So patients that are on, a pathway, one of the agreed pathways that is going, because not all pathways are going to go through the CDC, but the agreed pathways that go through the CDC will be direct access. So if the GP says you need this, I'm referring you, you'll be referred.
Thank you. I was just going to say, we've got a young lady who works in my office who is currently pregnant. She was suffering with pains in her legs and breathlessness, so she went to her GP and was sent to Medway for an urgent scan with suspected clots. When she got to Medway, she was triaged and she was sent round to Medoc, where there was a 7-hour waiting time to see a doctor. And if you're pregnant and they suspect you've got blood clots in your legs and on your lungs, that's not acceptable. Fortunately, she had the sense to take herself upstairs to maternity, where they checked her over and admitted her straight away. Because had she waited at Medoc for 7 hours, it could have been a very different outcome. Richard?
Sorry, I'm just looking at the asthma statistics. And it would be interesting because sometimes I think planning and health go together. And I just wondered, because we have a very high level of childhood asthma, one of the higher than national average. And I just wondered if there's an actual breakdown in the figures to where the pockets of asthma might be worse, because where the AQMAs are, like Newington and Tenham and Ospringe, St Paul's, is there a correlation between the AQMAs, like in Raynham, and childhood asthma? Thank you.
Most of our childhood asthma is actually located in Sheerness, and in a particular locality that's correlates directly with high deprivation, which links very closely with poor living conditions and damp housing. So yes, there is a correlation, and yes, we are working alongside both our environmental colleagues and housing teams to look at how we can address those issues.
I didn't realise that, and I appreciate that answer. And yes, and I think sometimes if you cure a lot of housing problems, you'll sort out a lot of health problems. Thank you.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Not just about housing. When you look at what causes and impacts ill health, 80% of it is the wider determinants of health. Only 20% is the bit that clinicians are able to influence, and 80% is outside of that. It's to do with education, it's the social environment, it's the deprivation, it's lifestyle choices that aren't necessarily lifestyle choices, but societal choices that are given to those individuals. So it's this whole big area that health have not normally had a part in, because historically we dealt with the 20% that we can deal with on a day-to-day basis. You know, that we see a patient, I'll see a patient can come and see me, and I can deal with them there and then, and they go on their merry way. I can only influence 20% of that individual's health by that mechanism. We need to move into that 80% footprint, because if we don't, and we don't move into that preventative agenda now, then in 10, 20, 30 years' time, our NHS isn't sustainable. So as a health and care partnership, that's why we've reversed what we're doing. That's why we're absolutely committed to using population health management and focusing on that 80%, which traditionally isn't our day job, and traditionally is outside of lots of people's comfort zones. It's not an area that they're used to working in. But we've made a commitment as a health and care partnership, and Swale Borough being part of that partnership, to work in that footprint, because that's where we're going to make the change.
And at the last IC Integrated Care Partnership that I attended, I raised this issue of respiratory asthma and the rest of it. And I asked if we can have some system whereby if GPs, let's say GP in Newington, suddenly gets a lot of people in with asthma, you know, overnight almost, there should be a system whereby you can feed it through, they can feed it through, so that the local authority can look at, oh, well, you know, has there been an air quality incident in that area? Because these things happen quite a lot over the piece, and there's no point you chuntering along with your GP colleagues that, oh yeah, down in St Answell or Bison Wood, it was pretty bad. Well, you know, let us know if somebody's burning stuff they shouldn't be, or, you know, chimneys and this, that and the other. That's what the local authorities bring to the partnership. Obviously in ours we've got Medway plus us, but we are the ones that can take action on that. I also, to be fair, did raise the issue of housing, and I didn't actually say, and so if you give us this money, but that's the next meeting to go, because so many of them are acknowledging that you can go to the doctors every week with your, or let's say every month with your chest infection, and GP can give you something. But in order to actually resolve that, instead of whatever that cost, that prescription costs, look at the costs which we did get on the LGIU before the election, which I kept somewhere. If we put the amount of money into bringing up the damp and mould conditions in properties, the NHS would start saving money over, I think it was it 10-year period? They would actually start being in profit. Not only start being in profit, but you wouldn't have all these people coming through because their problem would have been resolved. But they can go up week in and week out. You can do your temporary fix, but those children, those adults are never going to be sorted out because of the conditions that they're living in. Yes, we can do so much with, as you heard from Glyn, before on housing enforcement, but there are limits on that under the law of what can be done. So, but that is why it is the partnership, because there's so much you can do, you're 20%, but there's so much we can do on our 80%. And if the money actually flowed accordingly, intent, we'd be quids in, wouldn't we? Ashley?
Thank you. Point that you just made about when both CDCs are running, that the diagnostic waiting list will be back to pre-pandemic levels within 8 months. That's really good news, because I'm sure all the other backlogs in all other service areas would love to know that they could get that done within 8 months as well, because it's not going to happen in most other services. But I think I remember seeing it in the original business case for the CDC. What is the sort of rough, capacity for what it'll be running at? And will that sort of be incremental? So you sort of build up towards reaching the capacity for what it can be doing, or like once it's up and running, or that bit is just bam, everything's there?
We're not opening as a all singing, all dancing. We'll be opening in phases. So some of the services and some of it's outside of our control. We're currently waiting for UK Power Network. We need a new substation, for example, and they have their own timeline, and we can't influence that, unfortunately. As soon as we've got the equipment, so I have a CT scanner in storage, I have an MRI scanner in storage. As soon as areas are ready, we can install the equipment. So the outside equipment, the CT, will probably actually be the first to go, and then some of the smaller physiological study areas will come online after that. So it will be a phase. The whole project in the original business case was 3 years. We're just coming up to the end of year 1. So we'll be up and right. We've got another 2 years before we're fully functional, and which is all singing, all dancing, but we should expect to go live with most modalities by the end of this year.
Okay, anybody else got a question?
Nikki, thank you very much for coming and answering all those questions. If anything crops up, feel free to write and let us know, and we'll ping it round to all the members, but really appreciate your time on this. You're welcome to stay or go.
I will leave, but I just want to say, and I absolutely appreciate that we're not anywhere where we need to be, and some of it's outside our control, but actually a lot of it isn't. A lot of it's about realigning our resources. But what I would want to say is that tomorrow the NHS is 75 years old, and it's still a remarkable institution. And regardless of the horror stories, they're very, very few compared to the success stories. And so yes, I know things go wrong, and that's not acceptable. It really isn't acceptable. But actually, every single day, hundreds of thousands of people within our community use our services across Medway and Swale successfully with positive outcomes. So I just want to, given that it's the NHS anniversary tomorrow, I just wanted to raise, because the NHS has been made on the good result.
The Prime Minister is going to the celebrations and not doing Prime Minister's questions.
Very, very useful. Okay, item 7, appointment of Swale Rainbow Homes Shareholder Committee and training for Swale Rainbow Homes Shareholder Committee. Right. First of all, we have got a, I'll get Charlotte to go through her piece. We're recommended to appoint 7 members to the subcommittee, appoint the chair and vice chair. approve shareholder training mandatory for all the people that go on that. That training will be here in the evening. But anyone else who's not on the shareholder panel can attend, because if in the event that something crops up and you can't go and you need a sub, then you can have one. So I'm going to propose those. Lena. Oh, that's
It's all right, it's the GP calling back.
Yeah, there it is.
yeah. Okay, yeah, so I'm proposing 1, 2, 4. Seconder,
Sorry, you're what?
I'm proposing recommendation 1, 2, 4, i.e. 1, 2, 3 and 4.
Yes.
Good. Right, so there will be 7 members on this subcommittee. We have received nominations for. Oh, my eyes are really going on this. Right, we've received nominations for myself, Councillor Karen Watson, Councillor Peter Marchington, Councillor Hannah Perkin and Councillor Alistair Gould. That is 5. So 5 nominations have been received. Does mean there's 2 spare places.
Mike Baldock asked us, I said, yes, I was interested. He's obviously been too busy to speak to you. I don't know if anyone else said they were
Very
interested as well.
diplomatic, Anne. Yeah.
Well, I
I'm happy to nominate.
So I've got Councillor Kavanagh, yeah, so that's still it. Was there anyone else that should have been nominated and? We'll go, well, I mean, we can go with 6 and I'm waiting for another one. Kieran's got anything else?
Yeah, I haven't been nominated, but I'd be interested.
Well, I would propose or nominate Councillor Golding.
Okay then, well, that is 7. If we're all happy with those people who've been proposed, which I'll read through them again. Alistair Gould, Hannah Perkin, Peter Marchington, Karen Watson, Angela Harrison, Anne Kavanagh, Kieran Golding. All happy? You say yes? We'll take your hand up. Good. Right, that's 7. Do you want to do your bit and then we'll move on to the next ones, Charlotte?
The training.
Yeah.
Yeah, so obviously in the report highlights obviously the constitution of the local housing company back in 2020, and just to point out, I suppose, in terms of that the council is the shareholder of the company and the sole shareholder, and hence why we need the shareholder committee in place to represent the shareholders' interests. It can be quite complicated to understand when you're acting as the shareholder and not to overlap with becoming a director of the company. And if you inadvertently do that, then you can actually be responsible in your own capacity. So it's really important that we have training. Previously, we've trained the previous shareholder committee from Trowers and Hamlin, who provided our legal advice, just to sort of give that consistency and make sure that individually the shareholder panel is protected, but they also know how they act on behalf of the council in that shareholder capacity as well. So the recommendations is to actually make that training mandatory. I know we had periods before that, you know, it will be at a time accessible for individuals, ideally for a committee meeting and having that in person. So the proposal is to sort of make it mandatory for all committee members that have just been appointed, but also open the training up to all members of the committee should they substitute for one of the appointed committee members, subcommittee members.
Yes, thank you. It's just about the recommendation 4. I appreciate when you say all members of the Housing and Health Committee, but what about all members? Because next year I might be on the committee, or what happens if I substitute? It gives me that background knowledge. So if there's space, could it be opened up to all members, please? Thank you.
I personally don't have a problem with that.
No, I mean, I think it's one of those things, you know, it is of interest to members, but there's no reason why additional people can't attend. And that from a democratic services point of view, it is a subcommittee of this committee, whether they need to be officially, I think only the appointed members do rather than the substitutes, don't they? So yeah, that's absolutely fine.
Good. And I take the view that no training is ever wasted. You will always get something out of it. As I did. We will be writing the timetable, the board drives the train. That took an hour, but that's what I remember from my training. No, Ellen, don't tell him I told you, make sure it's a surprise. Okay, so we need to appoint a chair and vice chair of the subcommittee. I could propose myself and my deputy, my vice chair on this committee. That is what would normally be done. Second up. Well done. Those in favour? Kieran. Can we approve that the shareholder training will be mandatory? Hands up. Good. And we're opening up the training to not only all members of this committee, but all members of the council, as long as there is space. Okay, brilliant. Thanks, everyone. That's that one. Good.
Chair,
Oh, Mike.
can I just pick up on this mandatory training? As you probably recall, I've been on the member development working group for quite a long time, and we have tried, tried to get compulsory training, and it has only succeeded in relation to planning and licensing, because they are, I'll always quote this at people, quasi-legal. Can I suggest on this that we confirm this is mandatory because it raises legal issues?
I think that was the intent, Mike. For some reason, we agreed it last year, i.e. the first meeting of the new committee system. And my personal view is, well, it was agreed last year, that's it for life. But, you know, there's more democratic people than me who thought a new council should have that say. There are some things I think should be, and I used to be on the member development working group. I think there are some things that should be mandatory, because if you don't understand it, you could do some real damage. In terms of this is a shareholder. This is the shareholder committee, which is responsible for giving direction to the Rainbow Homes board. So that is why, you know, it is quite key that you know what you're talking about, and you know what your job is and what their job is, i.e. you write the timetable, you don't get in the cab with the train driver. Okay. So when they do this training, make sure that you're surprised and say, oh, that's a good way of doing it. Obviously, it sunk in with me, didn't it? Richard, can you turn that down? Because I keep going to say Lloyd.
Sorry?
Keep going to say Lloyd.
All right. I agree with what Councillor Henderson says. It's very awkward to say something is mandatory if there's no legal requirement for it to be mandatory. However, it's not, you know, I think everyone on the committee has volunteered to be on that committee, and hopefully people will do the training, so there's sufficient backup should they not be able to attend a meeting. However, perhaps you could put in a requirement to say, if they haven't done appropriate training within 6 months of appointment to the committee or subcommittee, that they can't then sit on that committee, and it gives a period of time in which to do the training. Thank you.
Yeah, there will not be a meeting of the committee until everybody's had the opportunity to be trained. It is for this committee to decide whether this is mandatory, because it comes under us, and we've decided it's mandatory. Some of the stuff that the Member Development Working Party are working on would come under policy and resources or full council, and what you get is some. Remembering we're on camera here. You get people who are not as supportive of being trained and know what's what as I am, who start getting a bit funny about things being mandatory. But you know, we are all volunteers. The best thing this council can do for us is give us the best training there is, and we should be taking the opportunity. We should be taking advantage of that opportunity. Nobody knows everything. I have been here for a number of years. I am still learning. I will still go to training, you know, where I can, because things are constantly changing. And, you know, the more you learn, the more you can help those residents that you elected to represent. I'd make every training mandatory, but they'd probably say you're and taking any notice about it. But I think it's important. But certainly this committee can decide for this committee, and we have decided it's mandatory. Thank you. Right, so the next one we've got to is the housing, homelessness and rough sleeping strategy. I mean, obviously you've read it and you've had the briefing, which I thought was really good, and you know, the staff do go, as you saw, above and beyond. I also get, you know what's, and it is debilitating for rocks to sit there and go through all that. I mean, you know, really appreciate it, Charlotte. Do you want to say anything?
Yeah, so this report brings forward sort of the adoption of the proposed housing, homelessness and rough sleeping strategy for 2023 to 27. Current one has just sort of expired and we have gone out to consultation. So again, because of the change in with elections, this draft version of this prior to consultation went to a previous committee and then it went out to consultation. Unfortunately, we had very limited consultation responses. We did try and do quite a lot of pushes on social media and out to sort of partners and the like. But say had very limited responses, and they are shown in the appendices going forward. Unfortunately, a lot of the comments that we did get actually didn't really relate to the housing strategy, but were more about housing delivery and sort of therefore planning issues. But I have highlighted those to the planning team, and I've got no doubt that they will come out through sort of local planning consultations anyway. One of the things that has changed during the consultation period is the Renters Reform Bill has been introduced to Parliament. It's still very sort of high level detail at the moment, and that is going through, but it's very much linked to sort of some of the comments that come out in the health agenda around conditions of home, and very much is a response to, unfortunately, issues with damp and mould that have been very much within the media lately, and the requirement to sort of improve conditions, particularly within our private rented sector, but also social housing sector as well. So I have added an additional action in there just to make sure that we keep up with the passage through Parliament of the adoption of that Act and look to how we respond to that Act. And there also potentially could be financial implication for us as a council if there is new burdens funding to do any additional work that is being outlined within that new legislation. Typically with new legislation, we do receive new burdens funding, but I said that's not been made clear at this point. So we have added an action in to obviously keep afoot with that legislation and the implications for us as an authority. I don't think we've really got much to add in terms of the strategy. Obviously, we are recommending its adoption at the moment, and the 4 key priorities around preventing homelessness, reducing the need for emergency and temporary accommodation, and sort of delivering the right homes in the right places and improving conditions in existing homes.
So the recommendation is to approve the housing, homelessness and rough sleeping strategy 2023-27. So I'll propose in seconded Councillor Henderson. And you want to speak? Because nobody else has put their hand up. it is a very good read. I've read it a few times. Most of this is legislative, and as Charlotte said, over the years, sometimes it's tweaked in between, because you can't have these huge documents up to the committee every 5 minutes. So just starting with changes in legislation, they'll tweak it and obviously make sure that we're compliant. But other than that, every so often, this committee has a number of strategies. Every now and again, we come forward for you to actually let's chuck it out the window and completely redo or whatever. Tom, you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to ask a question about part of the strategy. So I noticed that it's about 15% of people that become homeless as a result of domestic abuse. And I know that in Minster on the island, there are quite a lot of reports of domestic abuse. And my concern is for an isolated community like the Isle of Sheppey, obviously it's important to maintain family ties, it's important to maintain a stable upbringing for children. But if someone does have to flee a home through domestic abuse and they live on the Isle of Sheppey, what sort of provisions are there in place? Because obviously if they get moved somewhere else on the island, everyone knows everyone on the island, so word of mouth, potentially you could actually put a victim at risk by moving them there. But at the same time, if there's children involved as well, you're taking them away from their the school they've managed to get a place in, and they probably had to fight quite hard to get that place as well, because there are shortages of school spaces on the island. How does that work? Because that's something that I think is quite, in terms of safeguarding and looking after people, I think that's quite important.
Yeah, so in response to that, I think, every domestic abuse incident, wherever you homelessness case, is very individual, and it will depend on the seriousness of the risks. Domestic abuse typically is dealt with in a multi-agency setting, and there's various risk assessments that go through to identify how at risk somebody is and what support mechanisms they've got in place, what they can do. Obviously, they have their own decisions and their own preferences as well. So it really does depend on the individual case, but say typically, and the way the housing legislation is that you don't actually need a local connection to any council, so you can flee and present at any council to say, I am fleeing domestic abuse, very much for that reason that sometimes you cannot stay in your local community because it's just not safe for you to do that. And I think it's incredibly sad that local ties absolutely do get, but it's about that balance of safety for the victim and the children, and children are now seen as victims in their own right on domestic abuse legislation. But obviously, if they can stay within the home and they can be supported at an early time, there are a lot of support services. There's a lot of work that we as a council do around domestic abuse services. Some of that sits with the Communities Committee because the Community Safety Partnership headline a lot of that work, but obviously it's such a cross-cutting issue. I think it's basically down to the risk and the preferences of the individual involved about what services are offered and what support services are offered. But unfortunately, sometimes those local ties do need to be moved because of the protection of the individuals involved.
Thank you.
Alistair, you're asking something for me to look at the screen and all. You're next.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question on the priority criteria for deciding homelessness need. Is autistic spectrum or neurodiversity something that's specifically mentioned as part of that? I couldn't immediately see it, but I may have just been looking in the wrong place, and whether that forms part of the decision about priority setting. Because that's a group that often do struggle to cope in different situations, and also when it comes to allocating them into temporary accommodation, there are settings which won't work for some of those people.
So I think that rather than within the priority switching strategy, it absolutely does form the basis of whether somebody would be in priority need for homelessness support as part of the legislation. And again, a bit like in terms of response to domestic abuse, different people's needs are assessed. And we, you know, we do see individuals, so quite often we do place it in shared accommodation if it's not families, if it's single households. For example, if someone had a diagnosis on the autistic spectrum disorder, it would probably be inappropriate for us to do that. So we'd need to find suitable accommodation, which is another criteria within the legislation. So it's therefore likely that that would be self-contained, for example, to respond to those needs. But very much so, it is looking at their vulnerabilities, and so that's all types of disability and health needs, and an appropriate placement of temporary accommodation, which also can be challenging because about what's available. But we will obviously look at what the needs of the individual are and what accommodation is available, and look to place them in the most appropriate and best accommodation for them.
Thank you, Charlotte. I've got Ashley and Richard.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a quick question. Do we have a landlord licensing scheme in Swale?
So currently the sort of selective licensing scheme, no, we do not. So there is some criteria. We have reviewed it a number of times, and I think it is something that we have looked to pursue, but you sort of need to get the right volume to make it work. I think it'll be quite interesting to see under sort of some of the elements coming out under the Renters Reform Bill, whether that's going to try and regularise that area of work. But we do know some of our private renters stock in particular areas is quite poor, and is something that we would like to target. To reference the briefing that we had before, there is obviously limited numbers of officers within that, so it tends to be a very reactive service at the moment, and it's led by sort of landlord or tenant complaints, rather than us targeting properties that you know, we would like to bring up to certain standards.
So yeah, thank you, Chair. Just wanted to quickly come back. So if we were going to explore that, does the council have much data or insight to know the particular areas in Swale where the stock condition in the private sector is the poorest, and therefore the limited resource we do have? I understand we probably are already trying to use it that way, but if we were to look at that one step further, do we have that already?
So we do have, it was done a few years ago now, but we do have a housing condition survey. It's unlikely that that's changed a lot. We also have access to sort of some insight data that indicates that. So you've got your EPC readings and things like that. So we are able to sort of target it, as sort of mentioned though, but we've got very limited to be that proactive element. So if that was something that, you know, the council as members wanted to pursue, we would need to look at how we align resource to be more proactive on that process.
So just as an aside, so this is the hold the thought. There is a piece of legislation on private rented properties where, and by 2025, you will have to have this, that, and the other in place. So knowing that an awful lot of landlords in the worst areas probably would never clear them. What does that mean? That's true. We should have an idea of what we want to do, because if the government have actually taken the effort to bring in legislation to improve things for tenants, I can say that long last, can't I? Then the least we can do is to try and enforce it. Not blanket, but I think that we ought to. I always think that if you start targeting one area and have a few high profile bits in the local papers, might trigger other people. I know there are some landlords, as I've spoken to Charlotte, who are working on this. As their properties become vacant, they are making it up to this particular standard, but I'm pretty sure that not all of them would. So I think we should have on the list of what we want to look at in the future, so that we can actually have some sort of plan of, okay, let's target, I don't know, 5 properties in each of the 3 patches, see what that brings, just something like that, that say, hold that thought up there on the notice. Got Anne and then Richard.
Okay, thank you, Chair. First, Charlotte, thank you for a very comprehensive report. It's very informative. I see a lot of the data is 21-22. Is it too early to know 22-23? I assume things have worsened. And the other thing is temporary accommodation. Coincidentally, today, someone told me about her daughter, husband, and 4 children who are living with her temporarily. They're working, their kids are in school. It sounds like they'd been offered temporary accommodation, but they didn't want to move to Ramsgate, for instance. Is your temporary accommodation normally that far away? That's it, thank you.
So to take the first question, so in terms of the data, because obviously the strategy's been out to consultation, we obviously did the report and wanted to use a full year's worth of data. And we absolutely do have last year's data now. What we don't currently have, although it should be out around now, is the benchmarking data with other local authorities, which is obviously really beneficial for us to benchmark ourselves against others, particularly on the levels of decisions we've made, that percentage of decisions made, to see if we're out of kilter and where we sit within that framework. There's a bit of a lag. It's normally about a quarter behind to get that benchmarking data information, but we do have our information. Again, I'm happy to share the sort of Q4 position of the last financial year of where we are with all of those sorts of things. Your second question about location of temporary accommodation. Temporary accommodation is really, really tricky to source. What we're seeing is there's high levels of temporary accommodation with all local authorities, and we are in competition for that. We typically, you have about, say, 50% of our temporary accommodation is probably within borough. So we've got about 340 households in temporary accommodation at the moment, and the rest of it is outside of the borough. A lot of it is in Medway, so it's not significantly out. There was a point last year that we had to go to Sussex because we couldn't get anything in Kent. There was days where Kent ran out of temporary accommodation. That obviously changes one day, you know, and equally we might have other boroughs placing in areas because that's the only place that they can get them. But you know, we all use the similar providers. We have a decision from this committee in its previous form around purchasing our own temporary accommodation, and we are actively working on that project. But we need to find the right properties in the right locations, and you know, we're putting the framework in place to purchase and manage those properties, and we also work with Southern Housing around some local properties as well. So we do have access to local properties, but we are reliant on properties outside of the borough, because often people come to us going, I'm homeless tonight, or throughout our service, and we just have to place about where's available. We do try to move people back as quickly as possible. We try to prioritise those that, you know, maybe have schooling or, you know, employment and things like that. But again, sometimes it is really who's been out the longest. You know, it's very difficult to be fair in these situations. So we do need to try and be practical as well.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just wondering, I mean, what about the Equalities Act? Because in the strategy, it doesn't actually say that there's a commitment to look at that when anyone presents, but I'm sure that they do. But I think it would be wise to put it in the actual strategy, just to cover all bases. Okay.
Yeah, so the legislation means that we have to obviously take, so within the statutory legislation, so when Rox's team are making a decision around homelessness, they have to make an assessment as part of that. So that is kind of enshrined in the legislation itself. And one thing we were hoping to get more information back from the consultation was around protected characteristics. We know that there's lots of underrepresented communities that may face homelessness issues differently and maybe seek support differently. Unfortunately, we didn't get any responses very much around that. As a council, I know the equality strategy is looking to be refreshed, and I'm hoping that out of that maybe we can look to inform the strategy a bit further as well. But quite rightly, the Equalities Act is there. We have to abide by it, and it is integrated into our procedures. I think it's like everything, we can always improve on those situations as well. So it's about what information we've got, what services we've got available as well, to be able to respond to those.
Thank you, Charlotte. I've got no other hands up. So, are you happy that we proposed and seconded the recommendation? So all those in favour? Of approving, well done. Well done, thank you, that's unanimous. So we're actually on the last item. You're doing really well. Member appointment to Integrated Care Partnership, ICP Joint Committee. At the moment, this is me. So if somebody would like to propose me, I would be quite happy. Thank you. And seconded, okay. Now, just so you know, because I think Anne or Chris mentioned it, when I went to my first meeting and you had to introduce yourself, I said, I'm Angela Harrison. I'm from Slough Council. I live on the Isle of Sheppey, and I'm going to die 12 years before all you people sitting around this table because I'm in a deprived area. So I am passionate about health inequalities. So I thought I'd start a meant to go on. And well, I've kept digging away. But that's what it's about. There are a lot of NHS people on that thing, but more importantly, there are people like us from local authorities, from the voluntary and community sector, who are raising the 80%, which is the key part. And Nikki said earlier, and Alistair said when he first joined us, 20% of my patients and health needs I can deal with. The other 80% is Swabro Council and other people. So that's what this thing is about. And we are punching well above our weight, I can tell you that. Richard, you had your hand up.
Keep wearing the mask and you'll probably live 12 years longer than all of us. Thank you.
This is why I don't mind coming over to meetings here, because I get a few extra days. We're laughing, but I mean, it is bad, isn't it? It is. But, you know, we have been trying to do things for many, many years. Just as an aside on that, because I did give a couple of them out. I couldn't cut and paste because I'm not too well. But what I have got, which some of you might like, is the indices of multiple deprivation, which says that 22.5% of that indices is on income. 22.5% is on employment. There are 7. Education, health, crime, barriers to housing and services, living environment. And it actually gives you a picture of how these indices are put together. And as over time, the indices of multiple deprivation, the IMD, will be raised over and over again. It might be useful if you had that. Oh, right, okay. Proposed and seconded Angela Harrison as the council rep on the ICP. Okay, that was unanimous. Right, so as I say, there is an awful lot of information that you can have, but we don't do overload. What we're trying to do is the drip, drip, drip. This, I think, would be really useful. Some people are quite happy with the old technological stuff. I like a bit of paper. But, and people who are not on this committee might also, you know, not regular, might also, Roger, think it'd be useful to have this. I'm quite happy that everyone who's sitting here, plus the people who should have been sitting here, gets a copy of this
Yeah.
Okay, good, okay, right, well, that was the last item, unless there's anything I've missed. And I don't want anyone walking out of this room thinking, oh, I wanted to raise that, and she kept chivying us along, and she didn't give us the opportunity. So here, you know, this is your opportunity. Is there anything that you came in thinking, I really want to raise that, and you haven't? Good, good, good. Okay. Well, thank you all for attending. Really appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.